Hey, thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Very excited to be with you today uh, to discuss. Our title here is Three Proven Ways to Attract and Retain Talent During the Great Resignation. But there's a bonus here. You don't have to qualify what we're going to talk about today. Just call it Three Proven Ways to Attract and Retain Talent. If you're getting a little tired of the Great Resignation, then this is going to be still a great talk for you. Let me tell you a little bit about me. This is a topic, by the way, as we get into it, that I'm very passionate about, and largely that comes from a lot of the professional experience that I've been privileged to have over the course of my career. I started out as a clinician. I was trained in clinical psychology, social psychology back in the 80s and 90s, and I was very much focused both on the ideas of care and caring for people, but also behavioral science research, and really rolling up my sleeves, being quantitative, helping to develop hypotheses, test hypotheses, particularly with respect to issues like motivation, engagement, well-being, et cetera. And that's been a lifelong work for me over the last 35 years. And it's been very fulfilling. And I'm going to, before the webinar is over here, I'm going to give you some references and things if people want to dive into some of the incredible wealth of science behind what we're going to talk about today. There'll be places for you to find all that. And then finally, I've spent a lot of time out in the world in the applied commercial space. I've been a CEO for going on about 30 years now. I've started a couple of companies. The company I currently have, Motivation Works, is a company that has been around for about 20 years, doing applied motivational work, applied behavioral science work, particularly around things such as cultural development, but also in lots of other areas such as technology development, customer relationships, et cetera. So really, hopefully you'll see a little bit of the DNA of all three of these things as we go forward in the talk, and I present what I hope will be some interesting points of view, some a little bit radical, as well as some data and information to back those things up. So the Great Resignation, something that's been happening, and we see all these news articles about it. Upwards of 40% of workers are thinking about quitting their jobs, and you see people talking about it, and you see people analyzing, is it really a thing? Is it really not a thing? What's driving it? And you'll see lots of different perspectives on this. And we're caught up in this moment of what's happening in the workforce. But I think what's important as a first step is that we can really take a step back from the hype around the Great Resignation. I'm a data person, so it's like we need to see over time, is this really a big trend? Is it a blip? Is there something else driving it? There's some data that suggests maybe it's already receding. Other data is like, nope, it's sustaining. But regardless, let's not miss the major point, which is I think this is a signpost to not something that's new, but something that's really important when we're trying to understand our people and solve a very important people problem in our organization, which is retention, commitment, et cetera. So let's back up and let's focus on that point. What is this a signpost to? What is the thing that is really important? And one of the interesting things when you look at what's happened during the COVID period in HR is that you've seen, if you're paying attention and you're really looking, we're seeing kind of glimpses of ways to fix problems that have vexed us for years, for decades. Let me give you one other example. There was another COVID signpost that happened very early on in the pandemic, probably spring of 2020. And what happened was the pandemic hit, and what happened? Well, we were all scared. And we were all scared for our lives and the lives of our loved ones and the lives of our families. And at the same time, things were being shut down. We'd never seen anything like this. And what happened was a lot of leaders very genuinely, very authentically said, we need to take care of each other. My first thing is, how do I take care of the lives of our people? And we're going to, and policies were put in place. It wasn't just words. It wasn't just kind of the people first. I'm air quoting right now, people first, that you see some version of in almost every mission statement, right? But it was you saw people first in action. And we're going to get back to what that means in a minute. And you saw leaders doing this. And you know what happened during a very brief period of time? Engagement levels hit their all-time high during this period. And Gallup, when they were reporting on this, specifically cited this sort of care, this kind of attitude of care for the well-being of people, and people seeing it in action as a causal factor. Unfortunately, what then happened is companies got their bearings. There were other things to worry about. There was financial performance, and we saw a lot of pullback of those attitudes. And what happened? Well, we saw a decrease in that engagement, but we saw a blip. We saw a blip of something in the engagement space. I think the resignation space, maybe we're seeing something there as well, right? And so what we need to think about is we need to think about what's happening with our people and what is being activated. What's being activated during these times that have been so difficult and so severe and have taxed all of us so emotionally? What are some of the things that we can learn and carry forward that aren't specific to COVID or to the pandemic, but they're showing us something that's always been there and has been at the root of a lot of our other problems? Let me say one thing that gives us some clues about a general trend of what's going wrong here. This is in a McKinsey report, and this is looking at factors that employees say are important to them in their jobs versus factors that employers think are important to employees. And what we see here, and you can just let these dots all kind of wash over you because I'm going to call things out. Employers think that employees value money, working remotely, trading up to a better company, transactional mindsets, et cetera. So it's kind of about, these kind of transactional elements, right, of the job. What do employees actually value? They want to be valued by their manager. They want to be valued by the organization. They want a sense of belonging. They want the potential to grow and have advancement. Okay, these are the things that employees are really interested in. Flexible work schedule, these kinds of freedoms, chances for advancement, et cetera, these quality of life issues, and having caring and trusting teammates. And so employees are actually valuing a set of things that is not transactional, but really has to do with something deeper, something more meaningful to them, something that involves interpersonal relationships. It involves growth. It involves things that, as I'm talking to this audience, which is, I know you're an expert audience on HR. These are themes that, of course, we know are important, but here they are again. Here they are again emerging. And how are we going to approach these things in a way that gives us more success this time? Because we've been trying to crack some of these issues for a very long time without success. And so let me start with with that as a setup, let me start with this idea that our challenge in our organizations really isn't navigating the circumstantial things that are happening right now, the great resignation or all the talk about the post-COVID world. And we have lots of catchphrases like, what's the future of work? Well, I think that while, yes, we have circumstantial things to deal with, not trying to minimize at all, what I want to talk about today is the real challenge we have is we need to transition to what I call a post-management world, a post-management world. All right, what does that mean? Let's unpack it. Well, the reason we need to get to a post-management world is management isn't working. And I don't mean management isn't working in COVID or management isn't working in the past couple of years. Management hasn't been working for decades, almost since the era of modern management. So they've been faltering for a long time. When I say not working, I mean not working with respect to our people. That's what we're here for. That's what we're all committed to. It's been not working. Retention and burnout, we just talked about this. Sure, there's a great resignation buzz, but the reality is that people were burned out and were heading for the door anyway. Retention is something that when we work with our clients, we've been hearing about retention as a major concern for years, long before there was a great resignation or a pandemic. This is a chronic problem. Secondly, engagement. Right? I touched on this already. I'm going to circle back to it in a minute because engagement is so closely tied to a sense of well-being and fulfillment and obviously to retention of employees. But, only 1 out of 3 employees are engaged this year. Only 1 out of 3. And you know what? We can't move that needle. That needle never gets out of the 30s. We get excited if it goes into the high 30s from the mid 30s. I mean, we've accepted such a low bar. And I'm sure that you all think about this stuff. There's probably meetings in your organizations. You're probably working hard at it. You may even be seeing some incremental movement. But in most cases, we're simply not striving for, we're striving to move needles incrementally. And we're spending billions and billions of dollars and we're not making an overall shift in how engagement occurs. And just one other example, I could give lots of examples, but of course, inclusion. Now, thank God that the DEI movement is really starting to take hold, and we're starting to see some real acknowledgement and commitments to change. But massive inequities remain. I mean, we're just at the beginning of this road, and it's not like this is the first time that issues of inclusion and equity and diversity have been raised. They've been raised, and they've been out there for decades as well. And so management has been failing, has been faltering in serving our people for a long time. So let's move past management in its current form. Let's move past it. Okay. We need to make fundamental, not just incremental changes in how we're approaching things. We need to go take this thing down to the studs. You rip up the foundation and pour something new. So let's walk through a little bit of that and what that would look like and what we get excited about as a path forward. First, we need to redefine our mission with respect to our people. This is different than just a new mission statement. This is, again, fundamentally, what is our mission in our organizations and for us personally with respect to our people? That's the aspirational piece, but guess what? Aspiration is easy. Matter of fact, most of the time, organizations over-index on aspiration. We have lots of aspiration. Why? It's easy. It makes you feel good, right? And you don't have to have a lot of knowledge about how to execute it and put it into action. So we all kind of leave feeling good, and we're all going to rally around it, but it tends to be seeds that kind of get cast on the rocky ground and cannot take root because we don't have a path forward. So we need to understand the roadmap to get to that aspiration. So we're going to talk about the aspiration. We're going to talk specifically about a roadmap. And the exciting part is that if you're building a roadmap for your people, guess what? They deserve, and your organization deserves, something that is grounded in a tried and true evidence-based pathway to get there, right? You want to have a pathway that's proven, and we're going to talk about one of those to help move us forward on this path. And finally, once you've got that pathway, you've plotted the course, you've got the maps laid down, it's a confident path, then it's time to execute. So we need to take action really at all levels throughout our organization. All right, so let's jump in here. Let's jump in to these fundamental changes because this is where it gets pretty exciting. First, let's talk about redefining our mission to our people. And what I want to say here is, first, let's take a look at management. This again goes to this point of it's time for post-management. This is just, you could look at any definition of management. They all read pretty much the same, right? The act, manner, or practice of managing, supervision, or control. The person who controls or directs a business or other enterprise. All right, so one of the common themes here is it's about control. And when we think about we're managers and we're leaders, we are the ones who control the organization, and we control what goes on in the organization. This is baked into the very concept of management. It's literally defined by this concept of control, and this is what we need to challenge. And this is the fundamental tentpole thing in current management that needs to get knocked down by a post-management movement. All the language of management reflects this idea of control. Specifically, the verbs are all from our perspective, right? So we want to get our employees engaged, but in all the stories, our employees, we're kind of the heroes. We're the actors. How do we retain employees? How do we motivate employees? We've done a lot of work on motivation, just as a sidebar, and I've given many talks on motivation and how it really works. And one of the key things is, guess what? Motivation is not something that you do to somebody else. Motivation comes from the self. It's self-determined. And we're going to touch a little bit more on that idea. But already out of the gate, when we have this perspective of control, we start to frame the problem set from the wrong perspective. How do we engage employees? We don't engage employees. We want employees. We want engagement to emerge. We want employees to engage in their work. And to think that we have control over that already puts us, as we'll see, in a one-down position. Also, there's always a transaction at play in all of these people goals, isn't there? How do we retain employees is not the full sentence. How do we retain employees so that we have less costs from churn, so that we can get better ROI on our investment in our talent. So that, et cetera, right? This is true of all of our people statements. So there's a transaction at play. And you know this for no other reason, because when you're preparing decks for leadership, or if you are a leader and you're trying to sell in a program or an approach, you always have to have that slide in there, right? The slide that says, well, when the CFO raises their hand and asks, well, what do we get out of this? You need to have that explanation. So there's always a transaction at play. So think about this for a minute. These are people we're talking about. You're controlling what we call human resources. I know you probably all heard this point before, but man, just step back for a minute and say, man, isn't that creepy? There was no way we would name our sector human resources if we thought of all this stuff today. I mean, just all of the vestigial ways in which we are kind of dehumanizing and controlling fundamentally. And the reason I raise all this is that I don't actually think there's anybody on this call that's a cigar munching, mustache twirling villain. I'm not against anybody who smokes cigars or twirls mustaches. I'm just kind of making that reference to kind of the cartoonish villain thinking, oh, I need to control human resources. This isn't something that happens because there's bad people. As a matter of fact, I love working in HR because everyone is pretty genuinely passionate about people. That's what makes it more tragic. We're passionate about people, but you can't win if you're operating within a system that is so fundamentally about control and dehumanizing. Okay, so now, but it's easy to tear something down. Now we have to build something up, right? So in post management, we need to abandon transactional thinking and these concepts of control. That's what needs to be abandoned. What needs to be adopted. Instead, our job is we need to care for our people and facilitate, not control or make their motivation happen, but facilitate their self-motivation. Because I'm telling you that all of the research shows, and this is actually an incredibly strong point that's under-leveraged, that we all have intrinsic motivation. We all have the desire to be committed, to be motivated, to move forward. If the circumstances in our environment facilitate it, and if people stay out of our way and don't try to control us, those are the circumstances in which it arises. And as I said up front, we're not just going to talk about that as a concept. We're going to actually get into some specifics of what that roadmap looks like and the exciting ways in which it can be deployed tactically. But I want to make one other point about caring. I've made the point that management is transactional. This is the one that's going to take some courage, folks. Post-management, you cannot be transactional in how you think about your people. In other words, you don't care for people so that ... You don't care about people so that you make more money. You don't implement a program so that you make more money, a people program so that you make more money, particularly when it's about their well-being. When push comes to shove, remember the lesson from early in the pandemic. People want to know they come first over your bottom line, over your profits, okay? They want to know that that's where the commitment lies. Now, I can imagine a lot of people saying right now, oh boy, this is Pollyanna, this is whatever. But I'm going to tell you, again, one of the reasons I brought up, I've been running companies for 25 years. I've bootstrapped. Trust me, nobody looks at cash flows and sheets and all the things that happen more than I do, all right? I understand that businesses don't have capital and they don't succeed financially. And, there's nothing there to help support people in the first place. But I think that you can adopt this perspective and still have incredibly successful businesses. As a matter of fact, I would ask this question. Does anybody here think that if you don't put people first, if you put people first in this way, that anything bad is going to happen for your business? Or do you think that that's what's going to supercharge the engine, right? The point is, you have to have the courage to do it for the sake of the people and not as a transaction. One other example I'll give is, think about any important relationship you have in your life. And one of the defining characteristics of feeling cared for in an important relationship is it is non-transactional. As a matter of fact, almost by definition. If it were transactional, it would hollow it out and rob it of its feeling. when we all go into work, we don't become different human beings. And that same thing is going to be true as we go into work. Okay. So this, when we think about the things we talk about for employees, trust, commitment, value, belonging, purpose, we talk about these themes all the time. I'm just tying this to the point I just made. Those are all things that are complex, deep emotional experiences. So it definitely falls in that category that they can't be transactional. If we think transactionally about these things, it's going to be toxic to every one of these important people goals. We're going to hollow things out, and we're going to rob them of their power and of the opportunity to do the thing that I'm sure we all want to do, which is truly support people, help them grow, and help our organization thrive alongside that. We do an exercise where we say to people, describe your most motivating and inspiring manager. And we do that when we do workshops to train people on this idea of motivation and, you know, self-determination and self-motivation. And people tell lots of stories, but always the themes that come out are going to be related to some of the material we're going to get to in just a couple of minutes. So there's a little teaser, but there's another overarching thing where people tell stories that specifically lay out that they feel I am the most important, and my manager proved it by doing X. My leader showed it to me by doing Y. My manager, even when I quit, called me to see how I was doing. Even when it had no benefit to the business, they helped me to get another job. Even though it was going to cost the company money and it was going to set my team back, they knew what was best for me. They tell stories of managers and leaders giving of their time and energy in all kinds of different ways, but it all comes back to they showed that they really cared. All right, so now if this were a LinkedIn post, this talk so far, we could just kind of wrap it up, you know, with one of these, right? Plus, you know, we're about 20 minutes in here. Let's wake people up with a cute puppy. Hey, if this little guy can do this, so can you. Have the courage to just care, right? And we can make that aspirational point. And a lot of times this is where talks do go. And they kind of wrap up around this point. But unfortunately, aspiration isn't enough, right? I've got 3 cute puppies. I love them, but this isn't enough to kind of get us to the finish line, right? Our mission is an aspirational goal, and that sparks intention. Sometimes I like to think about it as propelling intention. Aspirations help to propel us, but we get propelled forward, but we don't see the path forward. We're going to all end up in all kinds of places. Some of them might be right, some of them might be wrong, but it's all kind of spaghetti against the wall. And we need to do better for our people. Our people deserve it. So we need some practical knowledge, some stuff that's grounded in evidence that shows that we really respect that we want to get this right for our people. So, and we need to understand the roadmap to get to that aspiration. So let's turn to that next, and let's focus on employee engagement. Because again, this has been such a perennial problem, and it's so much tied to our topic today, you know, loyalty and retention. And we just can't seem to really break through to get the really incremental, almost multiplicative changes we need in employee engagement. One of the things about employee engagement is that term describes an outcome. And an outcome doesn't tell you the path to get there, right? And so when we say, oh yeah, employee engagement, and oh yeah, I have an engagement measure, or I use some off-the-shelf engagement measure, and that engagement measure is correlated with all these good things. Hey, that's great. That's not your problem. That part's easy. You know, I love my job. Do you agree or disagree with this statement, or how much do you agree with it? There you go. You've got a great engagement measure. You can measure that. You can correlate it with things. You can see outcomes, but you need a path to make that experience emerge. So we kind of get that because we kind of stopped talking about employee engagement, and now we talk about employee experience. We have whole departments around employee experience. But again, as a behavioral scientist, I'm a nerd. You know, I want more details. What does it mean? Like everything's an experience. I had a burrito for lunch. That was an experience. But you know, there's experiences all over the place. Where's the specificity that we need for a path forward? Because another thing I love about people in HR is that we love to do things. We love to really take action and do things. So if we have the right path, we can really sink our teeth in and kind of move it forward. The problem when things are too abstract like this, and this is what I see a lot in organizations, is this tends to happen. We tend to energetically go out and sort of collect different models, different theories, different processes. There's a new there's a new best-selling book on some, consulting model or this or that. Every year, there's a few of these that come out. We read them, and they're aspirational, right? And like I said, aspiration is great. It sells. We get excited. We might try a few things, but we kind of collect all these different models and we put them on a shelf. Most HR departments have multiple platforms, multiple things going on. They're changing stuff all the time. And this isn't going to help our people move forward in a fundamental way, in the way that I've talked about. Because we need to get back, everything I've said so far is we need to get back to the basics of these human beings that work for us. And we can get much more focused on things that, number one, have much more evidence and proof than a lot of the models that are floating around out there. But more importantly, get back to the basic emotional psychology, motivational psychology, and well-being psychology in order to really care and support people. And a key question here is, all right, I know what my aspiration is, but what key experiences are universal to human well-being and a thriving life? And what we're about to talk through is not an HR model. It's not an employee engagement model. It's not a retention model. It's not an organizational psychology model. It's a human flourishing model. Everything I'm about to talk about will be remarkably powerful for your organization and for your culture, but it also is remarkably powerful for people's lives and people's relationships, because what we're doing is bringing in the proven science into this environment. And that's pretty exciting, because what it does when we get to the tactical side of the equation is people get energized. They like this. It resonates with them because it reflects a lot of who they really are. Okay, so let's get to what I call the 3 key experiences that people need to have in your organization. So all the experiences, when you're an employee experience person, we're going to narrow in on 3. And the reason we're going to narrow in on 3 is underneath the hood of each of these 3 is some incredibly powerful science and proof, but also a pathway to take action so that these experiences can emerge. And the first experience is your employees need to have the experience. I believe, yes, the first thing people think of when I say this is accurate purpose, right? I believe in the mission and the vision of this company and its leaders. I believe where we're going. Very important. But I believe is a little more focused than that too. Because again, while that's aspirational and that's great, every day somebody comes in to work or they log on to their virtual work and they have a list of stuff to do. They have tasks, they have responsibilities, they have goals, they have assignments, they have all the things that happen day to day. They need to believe at a local level in each of the things that they're doing, right? They need to believe in it. They need to understand why I'm doing this and its purpose, so that they have the experience, not just at a macro level of I believe in the mission, but I believe in my tasks and my job, and I can see how that work connects to that larger whole. So I believe is more focused. It kind of comprises a bit of this purpose work that we hear talk about a lot, but it gets down to the local level as well. Now, one thing about I believe that also is more helpful than just talking about purpose is, guess what? Endorsing something and understanding the whys and believing in it, it doesn't require people to enjoy the task. Matter of fact, it doesn't require even that they have choice over the task, right? Because there's lots of things we do in our lives. As a matter of fact, I'd argue that in adult life, the vast majority of things we do aren't necessarily enjoyable, nor do we necessarily have much of a choice over them. But if we believe in what we're doing, if we believe in the outcome, if we believe in that we're doing this in order to get something that we value or see the purpose in, then we have that experience of I believe. Right? Now, of course, it's great to give choice in things where you can, and but a lot of organizations, when they hear talk about things like freedom and independence and autonomy, we're going to get to that in a minute, they tend to think, oh, I have to give freedom and choice. We know from our research that's a false comparison. You know, freedom and independence equals autonomy. Autonomy actually equals this experience of endorsement, engagement, and I believe. And the reason I say that with confidence, and this is where I'm going to circle back to something I've referenced, is that There's a powerful science that's underpinning the experience of I believe, and the next two experiences we're going to get to. And I'm going to give you some references later, but there are literally 40 years of research, thousands of studies worldwide. It is the most strongly researched and validated model on human needs and human experiences and their connection to motivation, engagement, well-being that exists in the world. And what that framework, it's called self-determination theory. There'll be more references on this later. What that framework tells us is when we have the experience of I believe, what's under the hood, what's driving that is the right definition of a need for autonomy. That's what's fueling that sense of I want to believe, and when I believe, I feel fulfilled and satisfied and connected to my work and to what's happening in my life. So again, that need for autonomy, what is it? Let's go. We're looking under the hood. Let's look at that construct. It's our basic need to feel that we're the authors of our lives. We feel that we endorse and we have ownership of the paths we're traveling, the tasks we're undertaking, right? We feel that at a personal level. We're not engaging in things because, wait for it, we feel controlled. Control is actually the opposite of an experience of autonomy. So even from all the science, we know that management's approach, its very definition, is already standing antithetical to one of the most basic psychological needs that everyone shares. No wonder current management is struggling, right? Notice nowhere, as I said before in this definition, is that people have to be operating all the time independently and doing whatever they want. Look, we're running businesses. We have things we have to get done. We have structures and policies that need to be put into place and executed well. You can do all those things and still support autonomy, and we're going to get to some of those tactics in a bit. The next key experience that all employees must have in order to really feel that sense of connection and well-being and commitment and engagement is I belong. I feel like I am part of this team and I'm valued, I'm heard, I'm seen on this team. I matter to the other people on this team. And by the way, they matter to me, right? I belong. One of the key measurements of this isn't I like my team or I like my manager, but it's how much does my team like me? How much does my manager like me, right? And connect with me. So this sense of belongingness, and of course you can see in this, I'm sure as I say these things, I'd be stunned if anybody objects that this is not a desirable thing, right? So I'm not actually saying any ideas that you haven't heard somewhere amongst the millions of other ideas out there. What I'm saying is we need to brush all of the other things off the shelf and focus in on what the key things are. And as importantly, one of the reasons that we can grab onto the ideas like I belong and competence is, again, that underlying science. And so underneath I belong is the basic psychological need we have for relatedness. Relatedness is that basic need to feel that we matter to those around us and we're respected and cared for, and that we have the ability to reciprocate that caring. And even, just so you know, even when you do studies, a lot of people will say, well, that might be true in a Western society, but it's not true in more collectivist societies and other things. We've done research there. It's not that the expression of autonomy, relatedness, are exactly the same between cultures, but what has emerged is universal is people's need for them. And that's why when we talk about these things as basic needs, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but if you want to know the level at which I'm referring to these things as basic needs, it's the same as needs for hunger or thirst. Hunger and thirst are universal. They're everywhere. Doesn't matter whether you believe in them or not. If you don't have the nutrients you need, you will not thrive. That's what these needs are on the psychological level. So they're really powerful, and not surprisingly, they can unlock all kinds of benefits. Okay, anyway, I'm digressing a little too much there. Let's move on to the third key experience. These are really the only three that you have to focus on to have transformative change and really move to putting this post-management idea into action and the roadmap forward. I succeed. People want to succeed in what they're doing, not just at work, everywhere. They want to feel effective, but they don't just want to squeak by. They want to crush it. They want to really succeed. And they don't want to just succeed, in the moment-to-moment tasks. They want to succeed in their growth over time, in their development of skills and abilities over time, etc. Okay, and so underneath this, you see a pattern here. When I say I succeed as a key experience, what's underneath that? What's really energizing that? And what is going to be the domain of action for us as leaders and managers is focusing on the need for mastery. And that need for mastery is this basic need to be successful, to feel we're effective, and to experience growth and development. And so we have these three key experiences. And I would put it to you that if you buy in, which I hope you do, to this idea that we need to move to post-management, that we need to really grab hold and set some new foundations and get past transactionality, the next step is, well, how do we do that? What are the experiences that reflect this sense of caring? How do I care for people? It's one thing to say I'm going to do it non-transactionally. It's another thing to actually do it. These key experiences, I believe, I belong, I succeed, are there and trustworthy and actionable because underneath them, we've got this incredible foundation of behavioral science and research showing that what's underneath here and drives well-being are these needs for autonomy, needs for relatedness, and the need for mastery. This is a proven science, validated and trustworthy, and you can see we're starting to build a bridge now to go even deeper beyond having a roadmap and a pathway. Now we have to take action. We have to get into the tactics. And because this is a science, these basic needs have been validated as things that can be measured quantitatively. And there have been tremendous number of experiments where we can do interventions and trainings in order to have impact on these needs. And as a result, guess what happens? These key experiences emerge. They emerge because when you're talking about these kind of experiences, I belong, I succeed, those are hard experiences. They're easy experiences to understand. And boy, they move us. But how do we bring those about? That's complex. This helps to cut through that complexity and to point to the domains of action, right? So we have that practical knowledge, having a clear and trustworthy roadmap so we can implement and move ahead. Now, effective action. We need to execute effectively and do this across all the people in our organization. So we've got our model, key experiences, the underlying needs, and then this is where you can really get excited about the fact that there's years of research on interventions, effective techniques that do the following thing. They focus on these basic psychological needs and supporting these basic psychological needs so that those needs are facilitated. There's a greater chance of those needs being fulfilled. And when that happens, these key experiences emerge, along with, I would point out, so many of the holy grails or unicorns that we've chased, that we've tried to catch, like engagement. Engagement isn't something that you can ever put your hands on a knob and turn it. You can't turn up engagement. You can't directly. Engagement is a complex experience of commitment. Even, I would argue it's the closest thing to love we have in a workspace of people really loving their jobs. That has to emerge from something else. And this is what it emerges from. This is the model of action, right? So I've referenced this a couple of times. So let me just point your attention to this right away. The self-determination theory framework is what we've been talking about. We've been talking about basic psychological needs that come directly out of self-determination theory and the self-determination theory framework. We have a not-for-profit called the Center for Self-Determination Theory here on the URL. So please write that down because if you really want to dive into the research, you don't have to take my word for any of the things I'm saying. Go right there. There's a tremendous amount of research there, and it's all freely accessible. And there's lots to dive in on. And of course, I'm always happy as you want to unpack things to have conversations with people who are interested because I'll always be a behavioral science nerd. But what you'll find is there's 40 plus years of evidence there. Just to give you a sense for its adoption, it's grown 10 to 15 fold over the last decade. There were 40,000 citations to this model in various scientific publications and elsewhere. Last year alone, so basically 100, 120 citations every single day to this. There's amazing the growth. The concepts are very teachable. I've been talking here for half hour or so, 40 minutes, saying a lot of aspirational things, but the actual discussion of needs, I succeed, I belong, I believe, autonomy, mastery, relatedness, these are not hard concepts, but they're powerful concepts. They resonate with people, and as a result, people adopt them, right? So they're actionable and they're measurable. And so we have the ability to implement these things based on this very deep, we can leverage this deep research base. I'm going to give one example of some of this. Leader needs support in the workplace. This is a meta-analysis. And by the way, if you're looking at this going, what the heck? I'm sorry, I'm a nerd. I have to have at least one data slide. They could all be data slides, but I don't want to bore you to death. Don't worry about what any of this means, because I'm just going to walk you through what it says and explain it. A meta-analysis is basically a study of studies. It's when there's so many studies on something, claiming to have one set of effects or impacts or another, that you could say, you know what, let me group all those studies together to see if there is any main effect or big effect or central effect coming out of all those studies. And this is a meta-analysis of 72 different workplace studies, tens of thousands of employees. And what it shows as we go from left to right is that when leaders support these needs, and we're going to get into some of those tactical points in a minute, guess what? Autonomy, competence, which is in the literature, in the scientific literature, mastery is often called competence. It's the same idea. And relatedness, those things all go up. That's what those positive numbers mean. They all go up, and they all go up strongly. And then guess what happens then? What happens then is you see what we call high quality motivation emerge. People are working out of a sense of, they're leaning in, they're committed, they're engaged. We see that sense of purpose and meaning. We see strong relationships with that. And then I could put, there's 4 outcomes here on the right-hand side: well-being, general distress, work engagement, positive work behavior. I could list almost any outcome that you are working at, and you're going to see strong positive relationships with the positive ones, and you're going to see protective effects against the negative ones. In this case, there was a strong negative relationship between that high quality motivation and people's general distress. Think about how important that is, at any time, but particularly given what we've all been going through right now. And then the work we've been doing with our clients, when we apply this model, we see that people who have high quality motivation, by focusing on these need supports, they're actually seeing things like retention increase during the pandemic. They're seeing all kinds of protective effects because why? People feel cared for. All right, let's get into some of the details. How can you do this? Well, how do you really put this to work? Well, need supportive leaders can start focusing in on some important tactical points. Right? Okay, we're going to have communications and vision include these key experiences and need fulfillment. Include this language in your vision for all stakeholders, right? For your customers, even for your employees. Just as another aside, because these are basic psychological needs. These are the things that make everyone experience value and joy and well-being and fulfillment. This is an awesome model for customer relationships. If you're looking for some, again, one more little aside, if you're looking for a kind of a model to get past just looking at an NPS score, which again doesn't really tell you what to do, or a customer satisfaction score, which again doesn't really tell you what's working, what's not working. How can you get to more details? Measure their need fulfillment, measure their need satisfaction, measure how well they feel those needs supported by your product or your services. Anyway, that's a whole other talk. The point is that leaders can include these commitments and these specific commitments in the way that they're framing out their vision. In communication, remember, we talked about autonomy. People don't want to feel controlled. We're all very sensitive to feeling controlled and manipulated, even if it's with positive language or rewards or other things, right? What we want to be is understood and respected, and we want to know why these policies are in place. Why are we doing what we're doing? Because that respects that that you value our endorsement of those things, that we personally value them. And so to get that endorsement from me and build up that autonomy and that sense of connection and relatedness, communications need to provide the whys and rationales That's what builds that sense of connection, that sense of I belong and I believe. Practices of need support are modeled from the top when establishing mission and goals. Leaders need help too. This is the kind of model they can use in their minds as they're thinking about their behavior, their vetting, how they're setting up even things like OKRs and other things for the organization. You know, what gets measured gets optimized. Imagine if you could infuse these kinds of things, which are quantifiable and measurable, everywhere in the organization's structure as a way of culture building, right? So there needs to be this tangible demonstration of people first as essential consideration. And also, even in talent development, you know, I'm sure so many of you are directly in this area. How do we develop our talent? You know, what skills need to be developed? Well, guess what? Again, this is quantifiable and trainable. Emphasize skills and capacities of basic need support. We have programs and measures and things that have been developed over many decades to kind of do that skill training with managers and with people so that they can develop these key skills, which, by the way, man, it's just going to help them everywhere because of the centrality and fundamental nature of this idea of need support. And again, of course, investments in well-being are not transactional. I've hit that point a lot today, so I think we can move past that. But the other point I want to make here is that this is not just a model for leaders. It's not even just a model for managers. This is a model that can engage at every single level, right? If we're really talking about the employee, and we're talking about this idea of self-determination, then this cannot be another model where we have systems and training and everything that only happens at leaders and managers, and then the employees wait around to see whether any of it is going to trickle down to them, or what new policies will finally hit them 6 months down the road, or the meeting the manager is going to hold because they were told to have it, you know, in order to, you know, chat with them about employee engagement, whatever the system might be. Let's make what we can all be under this kind of a model equal players in what's going to happen in the organization. So need supportive managers, team tasks and goals. Take a couple of extra minutes, frame them in terms of their rationale, discuss how they connect in to a greater mission or purpose or to the OKRs, etc. These are all things that can be trained. It's amazing. It takes a few extra seconds, incredibly powerful. Listening, we always want our managers to listen more. Now we can focus that training. We can focus it on listening for where are their gaps in need support and fulfillment so that they can be more targeted in how they respond. Recognize the importance of all team members as a way to build belonging. And also hold the team accountable to a need supportive environment. If we start to make these things the cultural norms, then we're going to start to see so much care and well-being and things emerge. And again, right down to the level of the employees. In this model, you go to the employees and say, guess what? We need you to be an active participant in what we're doing here and in building this culture. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go one step further. You need to take responsibility for your well-being and for your motivation, because ultimately, you're the one that knows how to get there. You know better than any of us. And we're going to try to do whatever we can to support you and fulfill you. One of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to help you learn what the things you can do, right, to have a more fulfilling life here at work, right? So then there's training on their well-being needs. I've never met anyone that doesn't like learning about this model and learning about how to support it in themselves and in others, right? Take ownership of pursuing them. We give that empowerment and ownership to employees. And we train them in how to be mindful of the needs of others and how we support each other. And when we work with organizations, it takes a little bit of time, but sometimes as early as 6 months, sometimes it takes closer to a year. Suddenly you see spontaneously the language start to come out. People talking about these key experiences and these basic needs. And it's incredibly exciting because you know these things have taken root, right? And I think that's another point here that's implicit in everything I'm talking about is to really do this, you need to be able to measure and track and understand in your people analytics what's happening in your organization. You need it for a couple of reasons. One, as leaders, you need it to understand where there's, strengths and weaknesses and challenges. But guess what? If you're going to really get everybody on board, let's give reports to everybody. Let's give reports to managers on their teams, how they're doing as managers, places they can grow. Let's give a report to every single employee about themselves, about where their gaps are, about how supported they feel or don't feel. And based on those scores, let's give them recipes from this literature the scientific literature on what they can do about it, right? I've talked about the not-for-profit. One thing I'm just going to mention quickly is we have taken all that science and we have built that also into, if you want to nerd out and build your own programs internally, there's all that science at self-determinationtheory.org. At motivationworks.com, you'll see examples of everything that we're talking about here in terms of being able to measure, respond, give everyone dynamic reporting that's customized, etc. And so that's another resource that you can check out. But really, just to frame, just to kind of come back around in the last couple of minutes here, and then hopefully there'll be a couple minutes for questions, is I want to come back to these key experiences of I succeed, I belong, I believe, underneath of which is the foundation of these basic needs for mastery, relatedness, and autonomy. What we see out of the data when we're applying this is it drives all the cultural initiatives forward. Employee engagement goes up. Training and development can focus on these things to have great impact. And it can also be used when you're trying to decide in your L&D initiatives what programs to offer. You can actually use people's experiences of how need supported the training is as a way to help fine tune what your offerings are so that all training is more effective. Performance management. When needs are fulfilled, again, I said this early on. Does anybody have any question about what's going to happen with performance? I'm not at all suggesting that these be performance variables that are used to evaluate and in a way that feels like you're pulling them out of just deserving them because they're your staff. But I am pointing out that we have a lot of these initiatives and platforms and programs. And if you just focus on basic needs, you're going to see all kinds of exciting changes in all of these key areas. Again, not surprisingly, wellness and health, diversity and inclusion. So if we make this commitment, there's data that shows that across all of our initiatives, this is the tide that's going to raise those boats. This is the tide that's going to raise those boats. And just, sort of close on that. I think we've walked through kind of a story that has aspiration, which is we will genuinely prioritize our people by foregoing control and transactional thinking and adopting a culture of care and support. And we're going to do that by following a proven path through supporting the three basic needs that empower a thriving culture by allowing these key experiences to emerge. I belong, I believe, I succeed. And we're going to use this framework and roll up our sleeves as the basis for training, communication, people analytics, etc. All the pieces are there. All the pieces are there to move this forward. And I didn't think that it was meaningful to come out with something like, we need to abolish management or move forward to post-management without being able to articulate a roadmap for that. I think we do, and I think this is the roadmap forward. And I'm going to make one other statement. I gave this talk recently, and not this talk, but the idea of post-management. And I had somebody say to me afterwards, it's a business school professor, had been doing it for 25 years. Great guy, accomplished, great consultant. He said, I kind of really hope you're wrong about this because I've been teaching management for a lot of years and I'm afraid I'll be out of a job. And my first reaction is completely the contrary. Do you know how much work there is to do here? I mean, exciting work to do here, work that comes out of a different foundation in a different place. And so this is not, when I say post-management, I'm not trying to, tell management leaders, you don't have anything to do, or you got to stop trying to do things. There's a whole universe of things to do. It's a shift away from control to a culture of care, to a culture of facilitation, and the roadmap is there to do it. And when it happens, everything goes up. Vitality, happiness, creativity, physical health, really everything, right? And the reason for that's simple, and then we'll close here and see, maybe we can squeeze in one or two questions. It's simple: believing, belonging, succeeding, basic needs. These are the proven heart of meaningful experience everywhere. Meaningful experience and a flourishing life. There's just tremendous amounts of literature out there. So I appreciate everyone listening. I know I'm very passionate about this topic. but I'm just very excited to get this into the world. And with that, I think what I'll do, this is my first time doing an HR.com webinar. I'm opening up the question and answer window. And so if anybody has a question, we only have about 2 or 3 minutes. Type it in. I'm getting a lot of thanks. Oh, here's one. Do you find it difficult for leaders to make this transition from control to support? How do you help them make this transition? Yeah, that's a great question. Listen, I think that it's hard for all of us to give up control. I mean, I'm sure most people out there probably, you're a parent or you've got somebody under your care, and boy, when you need to get something done, even me, right? The first instinct is you can probably force something to happen if you use some kind of a transactional thing, offer a reward or punishment, raise your voice, or some mechanism of control. And so there is this instinct to do that. But what I also know from leaders, the way to tap into that is leaders, they do care. They care about their businesses and they care about their people. So I said something at the beginning of this, which is, people first is something that's on all the mission statements, but it's not really in practice. I don't think that's because there isn't an aspiration. I think that aspiration is there. And so if you lean into saying, look, this approach actually allows you to lead more effectively and achieve these things that you've long been striving for in your organization and with your people, and do something really transformative. And there's a proven model. This is another thing leaders like. There's a proven model and a proven path forward to do it that reduces the risk of kind of making this switch and moving in this direction. Those are points that, in our experience, really help leaders to kind of lean in and be able to take this forward. And so with that, I think I need to wrap up, and I'm out of time. But feel free to, I'm just going to put one more slide up here. You can see my email address. Feel free to email me questions, follow up, connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk about all this further. And again, thank you so much for listening.